Alright, so what we're going to look at now is our cardinal planes of motion and then their associated axes. You should have already watched Integrity for this. If you haven't and you haven't read the chapter, go back and do that first because this will make a lot more sense. So remember, we've got our anatomical position, palms forward, and fundamental with our palms in. It's important to keep this position in mind when we're talking about planes and axes, because when you go back to this, this is what's going to help you determine what plane and axis your motion is going on in and about. So, anatomical. Now if we go into front and back halves, that's frontal. If we go side to side, that's sagittal. If we go top and bottom, that's going to be our transverse plane. So let's look at sagittal first. Sagittal, dividing down the middle. So here's our plane. If you're on a people mover at the airport and you're just going forward, that is going to be sagittal plane movement. If you are walking forward or backward, just a normal gait, you're cycling, running, that sort of thing, that's all going to be sagittal plane motion. And if you look specifically at the hip, when you're walking, it's going forward and back, so just like this. So here's your axis, and you can see that axis is in the frontal plane, so you've got a frontal axis. The hip motion is in the sagittal plane, the one that divides you front to back. So you have frontal axis, sagittal plane. They are perpendicular to each other. Your hands are very important in this class because you'll use them to figure out your plane, your axis, and you also use them to help you with specific joint movements later on. So that's sagittal. Remember, that's front to back stuff, and you've got the sagittal plane moving front and back with the frontal axis. Then we have the frontal plane, which divides us into front and back halves. So that would be like a jumping jack is a frontal plane motion. Golf, you could make an argument that part of that is frontal plane. If you're doing side work on your legs, kicking, those can be frontal plane motions. So we're dividing into front and back. If you have something going on in the frontal plane, then you have an axis that lies in the sagittal plane, so you have sagittal axis, frontal plane. So if we look at our arm and we do a abduction going up, that's a frontal plane movement, that's the plane it is in. So if you put your hand the way that the motion goes, frontal plane, and then if you put your finger on the joint to go through it, that's when you get that sagittal axis. So the frontal plane is that kind of up and down movement. If we were sidestepping, defensive sliding in basketball, football, that sort of thing, that would also be a frontal plane movement. Then finally we have our rotation stuff that occurs in the transverse plane. So transverse plane, cutting us into top and bottom, you drop the vertical axis, so from your head to your feet, and that's the axis and plane. So if you think about swinging a baseball bat, that rotation that's going on in your torso, transverse plane, vertical axis, alright? If you look at certain ballet stances where you're standing and you have the hips rotating externally, or you do some of those shoulder rehab exercises where you've got rotation going on there, that's your transverse plane where the motion is occurring, vertical axis going down through it. We of course also have those kind of odd planes, the overhand throwing in the upper diagonal, kicking in a lower diagonal plane, etc. To figure out what's going on at the joint, because it's hard to classify motion when you're getting away from your reference position. So think about anatomical and then think about what's going on at the body part. So to get our arm in that throwing position from anatomical, we have to abduct, so that gets you a what motion, the frontal plane and sagittal axis. You also have the elbow motion going on, some external rotation as well. And if you just go back to reference your anatomical position and then go step by step to put your body in the position to do the movement, that helps you identify the specific joint movement that is occurring, which will then help you identify the specific musculature that's working, the agonist, antagonist, neutralizers, etc. So remember, anytime we're looking at motion and it's not perfectly in one of our planes, think back to reference and then think about what you have to do to put yourself in the position to execute the skill. So that's planes and axes, and now you can head back to Integrity.